Welcome to Huntin' Stories, brought to you by Late to the Game Outdoors. Everyone loves a good story, and hunters have some of the best. Our whole mission is to collect and share great stories from hunters just like you, to entertain and keep you motivated all year long. So, pull up a seat around the campfire, because here we go. All right, welcome to another episode of Huntin' Stories. Hey, this is a story that I kind of forgot about, to be honest. It's my December solo archery mule deer hunt from this past year. That honestly, like, not that you necessarily care, but I had this elk hunt film that I had been working on for close to 6 months. And there was so much footage, it had filled up my computer. It was the only thing I could work on. And I finally finished that so I could clear some hard drive space. And I started immediately digging through all this old footage that I had just kind of piled up on memory cards and hard drives. And remembered that I didn't forget I went on the hunt, but just going through all the footage, I thought, oh man, there was a lot that happened in that 3-day solo trip. And so why not share the story? So what happened is that this is the December over-the-counter deer season here in Arizona. In Arizona, we're not like as well known as, you know, a Colorado or an Idaho or Montana or whatever for just boundless hunting opportunities. But we have some pretty good opportunities if you're willing to hunt with a bow and do some homework and some exploration. For instance, our over-the-counter deer tag is good for 3 different seasons. Like, each hunter is allowed to harvest 1 buck in a calendar year. During whatever hunt, whatever method, you get 1 buck. And so in January, you can buy yourself a tag at Walmart or wherever and head out. There's basically a chart of here's all the units and here's when they're open. And so in January, a lot of units, the whole month of January is wide open. In most parts of the state, that's when the rut is going. It's a great time to be out there hunting. But if for whatever reason you don't connect on a deer, that same tag, you just put it in your bag. Then the end of August, the early velvet season kicks off. Take that same tag, go out for a couple weeks. You've got opportunities on bucks then. After that, throughout the fall, there's the rifle seasons, which are all draw hunts. But if you draw one, then that's a chance to harvest your 1 deer. And if for whatever reason you didn't draw or you weren't able to connect on that rifle hunt, you still have that same archery tag, which is good again for some portion of December in a lot of the units as well. So December is a great, like, if you've just had a rough year and you haven't been able to connect and you still haven't filled your deer tag, I always look at that as like the last ditch effort. Chase anything that's out there. Like, the tag says any antlered deer, and that is my policy in the December hunt. Like, whatever little forky buck I see, I'm putting a stalk on because I still haven't filled the tag. And the beauty of it is that tag usually ends December 31st. January 1st of the following year, you can pick yourself up a fresh tag for the next year and get right back out there. It's terrific. I love it. And so 2019, it was a slump year for me. Freezer was empty. I had not connected with anything. And so right after the Christmas holiday and wrapping up some of that, I took the last 3 days of the year to head out solo into an area I had been a couple times the year before where I wasn't seeing big bucks, but I was getting into deer every day, like just glassing them up every day, all day long. It's kind of a nursery area, a lot of does and fawns and forky bucks. But that's perfect for December especially. Like, I'm not looking for giants, I'm just looking for opportunity, and there's lots of opportunity in this area. So I had initially planned to go a couple days earlier, and then this freak winter rain, sleet, snowstorm blew through the entire state, and so I delayed my plans a couple days. And so was finally able to get out there on the 29th. Left my house at like 3 in the morning to drive up to the trailhead, and the spot I wanted to go is kind of along this old road that's been closed down to motorized travel for a decade or more. So it's pretty easy hiking in, and then you can kind of branch off the road, and there's some glassing points I have marked out where I usually have good luck. And so I start hiking in there, and I get a quarter mile down the trail, and there's this creek crossing that I remember from the year before that I was in, where it was deep enough to where you have to like pay attention to where you step. Like you have to find a rock or a particularly shallow place, or like you just have to sort of be careful, keep your boots dry, but you get over it, and then that's the end. So I was already packing in with extra water because I had every time I had been back there before, there was never any water. Well, with all the moisture we had had and that fresh snowstorm that's melting off the peaks all around the area, that little single stream became this 4-part river crossing that was deep enough, like you have to take your boots off and roll your pants up. It was in the high 20s that morning when I left the Jeep, and so that water is just ice cold. I always seem to forget something on a backpacking trip, and this time I had forgotten my Crocs because I didn't plan to be crossing rivers. So I won't lie to you, I almost turned back. Like it was early, I was tired, it was surprisingly cold, and just like from headlamp looking at this massive expanse of river that I had to cross, I really thought like I don't know if I can do this. I might have to find a different spot to go hunt. And fortunately, I just decided to power through. Feet froze. It was super painful. But, you know, another mile down the road, I got feeling back on my toes. And I know if you're listening to this in a different part of the country, you're probably thinking, like, what a wuss. Like, you cross rivers when you hunt. It's no big deal. In Arizona, we don't. So it was a new experience for me, for sure. And that was the worst river crossing, but there were like 5 more between that point and when I finally got to where I wanted to be camping and glassing and hunting. One of which I made the poor decision not to take my boots off, and it was deeper than I thought. Water rushed up and over the ankles of my boots, just soaked them. So I was in wet feet for a while after that. Anyway, I hike my way in. By the time I get to where I want to be, it's 45 minutes, an hour later than I expected to be at my glassing point because all the river crossings slowed me down. And there are icicles in my beard and mustache. It's just so cold. But I get to my glassing point. I set my pack down. I'm messing with my tripod and just kind of scanning the slopes that I plan to glass. And with my naked eye, I pick up some deer feeding under a tree. Great sign. So I finally get the glass set up, and I start glassing and picking apart, and that group that I saw with my eye was seemed to be all does and fawns. But then I pick up a buck who's moving pretty quickly, kind of in my direction on the other side of the drainage. So I decided to just get up and try to head him off once I figured which direction I thought he was going in. So I left all my gear, just grabbed my bow and a camera, and just ran over. And that deer vanished. He was moving at a pretty good clip. Like he wasn't meandering and feeding. Like he was on his way somewhere. And he just 4 legs always outruns 2. So I got up to where I thought he would be, couldn't pick him up. And while I was standing there looking, I could swear I was hearing something like down this steep drop off of the hill that I was on. And so I tried to creep up slowly a couple steps, keep trying to peek over just to see, because I know I'm hearing something moving around over there. It sounds like it could kind of be like hooves on rock. And there's this little scrawny dead desert bush that I'm trying to kind of stick myself close to just to minimize my movement. And I took one more step to try to get a view of this thing, and suddenly this coos deer buck barrels out of the brush below me and goes bounding away. Which was the closest I've ever been to a coos deer, for sure. He wasn't a big buck. He was, kind of a forky coos, which, if you've ever hunted coos deer, those suckers are small anyway, so a young one is especially small. But the tag in that unit is good for any antlered deer, coos or mule deer, and even though he was tiny, man, had he given me a shot, I absolutely would have taken that, because there is something special about harvesting a coos deer with a bow. I have not done it yet and would love to. Anyway, he goes bounding away, and that other mule deer that I initially went running after never turned up. But, I'd been in this spot for all of 30 minutes, and I have already made a quick and failed stalk and spooked up a coos buck. Like, it's exciting. Great times. So I hike back over to where all my gear was, sit down, start glassing. I'm glassing another maybe 10 minutes when I pick up movement in the bottom of this drainage. And there's a few does, and then I finally see antlers. And it's the biggest buck I've ever seen in this area. So not a gigantic buck. He's a solid, pretty big 3x3. But for this area where I'm used to just seeing forkies everywhere, he was great. He was rolling with his does. He was sniffing them. He was pushing them around. This is the very end of December, so it's like some pre-rut activity. And oh man, my heart started racing when I saw this guy because he was 300 yards from me with some does. They were just feeding along. They had no idea I was there. I had a good wind. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to have a real shot at this guy. And so I decided to try something different that I typically have attempted to just watch deer, let them bed down, and then try to stalk them in their beds. Which lots of guys are super successful at that. I have a buddy who's a wildly more successful deer hunter than I am, who says most of the time he likes to move in on them while they're still feeding. Like try to pick up which direction they're generally going and start to make your stalk while they're moving because they're distracted. They're making their own noise. He has a ton of success doing that. So I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And the way they were moving was great for the wind that I had. And there was this little drainage off to my left that I could get down into where they wouldn't be able to see me anymore. And then I could work my way down the hill. And where they were feeding is kind of surrounded by a lot of junipers. And I thought, perfect, I can pop up and then just kind of go from tree to tree and close the distance. Hey guys, this is Eric from Late to the Game Outdoors and producer of Hunting Stories. I wanted to thank Bun and Beanster for making this show possible. These guys are the real deal. Whether you're a seasoned business owner or a startup or running a side hustle like I am, they can help you with your branding, logo, easy to manage websites, and fresh creative ideas for your business. They can also help you look the part by helping you design those tricky one-off events. They deliver amazing printed goods, quality apparel, even signage. Truly a one-stop creative shop. And they stand by their work guaranteed. For free consultations and useful resources, go to bunandbeanster.com to check them out or catch them on Instagram at bunandbeanster. Now back to the show. So I managed to get down to that drainage, and as I'm on my way, one of the does I would swear is looking up at me. And so I was just playing it super slow. Like I would just stare at her, and whenever I would see her turn her head or look a different direction, I'd take another couple steps. She would look back at me. I'd stay super still. Like it took me a long time just to get to that drainage, but once I dipped down off the hill where I was out of their sight, as quietly as I could, I booked it on down there. And then I popped back up once I was parallel with the big trees that were in their way. And I couldn't see them, couldn't really hear them. I knew they were still there. At least I was hoping they were still there. I hadn't heard them blow out or anything. And I think I made a couple of grave errors. One is that I was just too amped and too excited about it to take my boots off. Like I just, for whatever reason, convinced myself like, the ground is kind of wet because it's been raining. And let's face it kind of sucks to walk around in your socks. So I kept my boots on, which is probably a big mistake. And I think like as slow as I thought I was going, I just pushed it too fast. Like I was feeling confident because I had so many junipers that I could hide behind and move around in, that I for whatever reason, it just gave me this confidence to move quicker than I should have. So I thought I was slowly stalking, but I probably should have gone at half the speed I was going, with my boots off. So because I was creeping up and trying to get, a visual on where they are, but also stay hidden. And then at one point I finally, I could see legs. So I knew they were still there. And I took a step and unfortunately just heard that sound. Every deer hunter hates to hear that doe just like blowing at you because she's mad, which is a really weird sound to make. Like biologically, I wonder what makes them say, this is the warning sound we're going to use. But I heard that and thought, crap, this is the end. I kind of leaned over a little bit, ranged the doe who was staring right at me. She was at 104 yards. So they're still out of bow range. And sure enough, once you hear that blowing sound, you're not going to, like, I stood still, I waited, I stopped doing anything. But she had sounded the alarm. They kind of rallied together and dove on out of there. And I thought when I was glassing, I saw that buck and I thought he had maybe 5 or 6 does with him. As they ran away, there were at least 15 does running around with this buck. Like he had gathered his harem and was just ready for them to start coming into heat. It was crazy. But they ran up and out of sight. And they actually, like, they ran a ways and they would stop and look at me, and then they ran some more. Like, they weren't just like doing that insulting bounce away from me so much as they were kind of trotting. They never winded me. They just knew something was up. So I actually, like, was just out of curiosity. I was like, I wonder how far do they run when they're spooked? So I actually, once they were up and over the hill, I booked it all the way up that hill just to try to see where they were, to see if I could pick them up again, or maybe they would have calmed down already. Well, unfortunately, I crested the hill and could see them. They were about 120 yards away, and they could also see me because I was moving quick. I was not as quiet as I probably should because I didn't think I was going to catch them to hunt them. I just thought I was going to learn something. And sure enough, they that second time, they thought, okay, this guy is definitely following us. And then they bounded away, and I never saw them again. But it's a killer start to morning one. So I, at that point, it was about lunchtime, decided to finally set up my camp, prepped some firewood, ate some lunch, like just kind of took care of some of that business over the afternoon. Set up and glassed the rest of the afternoon and the evening, different sides of the ridge, just trying to check stuff out. And there was not a lot of afternoon activity for whatever reason. That night, finally was able to dry my boots out because they were wet pretty much all day, but got them steaming by the fire so that they were nice and dry the next morning. Middle of that night, the wind started just ripping through that area. And it was not letting up. So I was glassing predominantly a north-facing slope, and that was definitely the windy side. And usually, under normal conditions, it's just kind of packed full of deer. That morning, there was nothing over there. So after a couple hours of that, I decided to kind of come back up and over to the other side of the ridge to see if maybe they were just trying to stay out of the wind. They were on the other side. And as I crested the hill, kind of back over where my camp was, I see this lone forky buck just sort of cruising out in the open a couple 100 yards down from my camp. And he's heading down towards this little gully. And based on the direction he's going, I think, or I hope, man, he's going to come down this little gully and then just pop up the other side. And I would have an easy path up and around where he can't see, where I could intercept him once he crosses over to the other side of that drainage. And so I book it over there, and once I slowly crest up over next to this bush, and I'm looking around trying to pick him up. If he had kept the course I thought he was gonna take, he would have been 50 yards just walking right past me. Unfortunately, I see him still on the other side of the drainage. He had gone down the hill to get out of the wind, turned right, and started walking away. So I watched him for a little bit, and then he disappeared into this thick stuff. And I watched for what felt like forever and never saw him come out on the other side. So it was early for a deer to bed, but I thought maybe he bedded down in there early to get out of the wind. So I stalked my way down there, right up next to that thick stuff. He was not in there, so he had disappeared somehow, giving me the slip. But it had turned things around from a windy morning where I didn't see anything to making a stalk on a buck. I then set up glassing into the wind, which is miserable as the glasser, but is more effective because I just kept picking up groups of deer that were all on that side because they were trying to hunker down out of the wind. Unfortunately, every group was nothing but does and fawns. So spent the afternoon doing that. That evening, I went back over. The wind finally subsided mid-afternoon. I went back over to glass the north-facing slopes. And as I was sitting there, I had glassed the whole range a couple times and was thinking, man, there's nothing here. So I was debating with myself, should I move and try something else? Or it's still a little early for evening activity. Maybe I should just wait and they're going to come out. And then out of nowhere, these deer appeared in the bottom of the drainage, real close to where I had stalked the giant buck the morning before. And it was a doe and 2 fawns. And so I was glassing them and trying to figure out where they had come from and hoping maybe a buck had been hanging behind and he was going to come out and join them to eat. And then to my horror, I see this blaze orange hat riding a mountain bike down this old overgrown road that's in the bottom of this drainage. And I think, well, here we go. Granted, this is public land. We're all entitled to it. I suppose it's what I get for choosing to hunt off of a network. For it, it's an old road where it's only, foot, horse, and bike that can get back in there. I've never seen horses back in there. So perhaps I should have, taken an even more wild or hard to get to place. But here comes Orange Hat working his way down the road, and he doesn't even see these does. I can just see him getting closer to them. And sure enough, the doe starts bounding away, and the fawns follow her, and they're looking back. And so I see Orange Hat. He jumps off his bike and hides behind this bush and gets his glass up because it's what I would have done. He was startled by some deer, and so he was looking for antlers in there. And those deer run away. And I see him kind of walk his bike a little further down, chains it to a tree, and then he starts to climb up the other side of this ridge. And I'm just thinking, well, crap. Here goes my afternoon hunt. Like, he is in that space. And so I glassed a little bit more, glassed kind of to some other directions where maybe he hadn't spooked them out. But I decided to stay put there, that maybe he would, it's a big enough range that I'm looking at that from these other directions, or maybe he's going to spook something out that's going to run to the side. Nothing's showing up, and I'm about down to the last 45 minutes, half hour of glassing and shooting light. And I see Orange Hat reemerge from the other side. He was walking back down to his bike, starts to ride out. And so I'm like, well, there goes my day. Okay. So I decide to head back to camp. And up to this point, every time I had gone back to camp, I had run into deer. Like, they haven't been at my camp, but I crest the hill and kind of scan, and there's deer there. So I do the same thing. I crest that hill very slowly. I get to my camp. I'm scanning out in the area where I had, seen deer, and I don't see anything. And I had this little folding chair that I was using to sit and glass in. And so I just kind of lazily drop it next to my tent. And suddenly I catch motion out of my peripheral vision. And I look up, and there are 3 deer, one of which is a decent sized forky buck, and they are starting to run away. And they are surprisingly close. I mean, they knew I made the sound. They looked, they saw me, they were taken off. But I, just because I'm a glutton for punishment, stopped, pulled my rangefinder out, glassed where they were standing, and they were sitting right at 65 yards. The last pin on my bow is 70. I feel real comfortable out to that range, which means that had I just looked a little more carefully, looked a little longer, and just not made a stupid sound, it is highly possible. There were a couple of gaps in the brush and in the trees along the path that they took, where I would have been able to just sit there right next to my tent, draw my bow, and get a shot at this buck. But I was foolish and not paying enough attention, and they were gone. Went to bed that night, woke up the next morning. It was a little bit warmer than the previous morning. And unfortunately, the hunt ended on the least climactic morning of the day, of the weekend. That I saw a couple more does, a few groups that I'd been there long enough where I was starting to recognize groups like that the doe and the 2 fawns that Orange Hat scared. Like, I saw them again, just in another little part of the drainage. And I was starting to recognize these pockets, but none of the bucks showed up. And as I moved from one spot to another to finally just decided I'm going to spend the last hour I have kind of hunkered on this other side in the shade of a tree, I made one of those just missteps where you're not, like, I was looking and scanning the area and not watching my feet, and just caught some weird lump or rock or something, rolled my ankle so bad. Just one of those rolls where, like, your brain makes all the weight come off your foot, and if it weren't for the tripod I was holding that I could catch myself on, I would have absolutely just fallen on my face. And so I laid there just feeling like that burning, swelling kind of feeling that you get when you've injured yourself, and still rode it out for the last hour I had given myself because I had to get back home. It was New Year's Eve. We had people coming over, and now I've got this injured ankle. So no deer came by at that point, and just chose to head back to camp, and it was time to pack everything up and figure out how to get out of there. I was a little over 3 miles away from the Jeep at that point, and man, fortunately, in my med kit, I always have an ace bandage. I've carried it for years and never even cracked the cellophane on it. And there have been times where I've been packing up and thought, man, this thing, it's not heavy, but it takes up a decent amount of space in my little medical compartment. I've toyed with the idea of leaving it home some trips, but man, I am so glad that I never did, because had to wrap that ankle, tie the boot extra tight. I was going to hike out with my bow in hand because there were tracks and stuff all along the road leading in, but decided it was wiser to strap it to the pack and use my trekking poles to help stabilize and take some pressure off my ankle. Pop some ibuprofen and hit the trail. And when I came to those river crossings that were going to soak my boots, I just decided, you know what, I'm heading out of here. I'm just going to let the boots get soaked, keep my ankle supported, and then just change into my dry socks back at the Jeep and drive home in my socks. So that's what I did. I just kind of took it easy, took it slow. The ankle did all right, made my way across all the rivers, down the road, back to the Jeep, and came home. And man, I wish that the story obviously ended with a dead buck and a great pack out story. But man, what I love about that weekend and other weekends that I've spent back in that area is that even though there's not like usually huge dramatic, trophy bucks running around, I love how many stalks I get in. Like I am willing to shoot a smaller deer if it comes to that, or even just get the practice that comes with getting to put in multiple stalks a day, and the practice of glassing and just watching deer behavior. Essentially, I would rather be in a target-rich environment than a trophy environment. And I know there is a lot to be said, and I'll get some pushback on like letting deer grow to a certain level of maturity. And I totally get that. And, if I was looking at that big 3x3 and he had a Forky with him, obviously I would have targeted the bigger, more mature buck. But as I said at the beginning, this is a last-ditch effort, end of the year. This tag is going to go unfilled. And at least for me, especially when my freezer is empty, I will take any legal buck, which in Arizona, we don't have like point restrictions. It's just you got to have an antler on your head. I'll take that over what might look really cool and impressive on Instagram. But that's just me, and to each his own. If it's legal and ethical, go for it. I support you. Anyway, that is the end of that story. But man, more to come. Currently, as I'm recording this, spring bear is right around the corner, and I was just talking to my buddy who has been out looking at stuff and said he's already seeing tracks. And it is super rainy and wet this winter, so there should be a lot of green growth that bears are hitting. And so hopefully this long-standing curse of the bear that I have, which I'll tell some of those stories and episodes in the future, hopefully that's coming to an end this spring. I can finally put a Bruin on the ground. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. If you'd be so kind to leave a review, rate the podcast, it really helps. It helps people find the podcast more organically, and helps me out. So thanks again. We will see you real soon for more hunting stories. Thanks so much for tuning in to Hunting Stories. And if you want to stay up on what we're doing with the podcast or anything else going on with Late to the Game, go ahead and check us out at latetothegameoutdoors.com or give us a follow on Instagram at latetothegameoutdoors. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.